All right, let's dive right in. Imagine this. During the Bosnian War, as the atrocities just kept piling up, the world was stuck with this absolutely terrible choice. Do you broker a quick, messy peace just to stop the killing? Or do you stand firm, demand justice for the victims, even if it means the war drags on? You know, this tension between peace and justice, it's right at the heart of a really fierce debate that we're going to unpack today.
So get this, in 1996, an anonymous author drops this absolute bombshell of an accusation. The argument was basically that human rights advocates, who this author calls moralists, were so busy demanding perfect justice and accountability that they actually made things worse. They claimed these moralists got in the way of a practical peace deal, and because of that, were responsible for more people dying. Just wow.
I mean, that's a heavy accusation, right? But is it actually true? Was the quest for justice really the problem? Well, not according to human rights advocate Felice Gaer. She argues that this whole accusation completely misses the point and the real culprit. So let's dig into her side of the story and see where she thinks the blame really lies.
Okay, Section 1, a shocking accusation. So first things first, let's really break down the accusation itself. To get a handle on this whole debate, we need to be crystal clear on what Anonymous was actually arguing. So the gist of it is this. Anonymous believed that while the negotiators were desperately trying to stop the bloodshed, you had these so-called moralists on the sidelines being, well, disruptive. They were insisting on things like war crimes tribunals, on holding people accountable. And in this author's view, all that idealism was actually deadly. It got in the way of a quicker, more practical end to the war. All right, Section 2, shifting the blame. And this brings us to Felice Gaer's counterargument. Because, you know, she saw things, well, completely differently. For her, Anonymous wasn't just a little bit off base. He was pointing his finger in the entirely wrong direction.
And here's where you can see the two sides laid out so clearly. You've got Anonymous on one side, pointing the finger squarely at the moralists. But then Gaer just completely flips the script. She says, nope, that's not it at all. The real problem, in her view, was the international community's total inaction and all their broken promises. It was about powerful nations failing to back up their words with any real action.
And this timeline of the London conference, man, it really drives Gaer's point home. Think about it. In August '92, all these international powers get together and make these big, bold statements about human rights. But then what happens? Literally days later, the shelling of civilians gets worse. The Bosnian Serb leader just lies, says the camps are empty, and nobody calls him on it. And for weeks, every single promise made at that conference is ignored, with zero consequences from the West of the UN. This pattern of empty threats basically gave a green light to the aggressors, teaching them they could get away with anything. And that, Gaer says, is what dragged the war on, not some statement from a human rights group.
And this quote that Geister uses, it's not from an activist. It's from a former high-level U.S. official. And it just says it all, doesn't it? Western inaction told the Serbs in unmistakable terms that there will be no intervention. The message being sent wasn't, we're strong, we'll stop you. It was, we're weak, do what you want. And you better believe that message was received loud and clear.
Okay, Section 3. Who are the moralists? So this brings us to Gaer's next big point. She basically says, look, to see why this whole accusation is so flawed, you've got to deconstruct this vague label he keeps using, the moralists. Who is he really talking about?
And what Gaer points out is that this word moralist is just this lazy catch-all term. It's like a giant bucket Anonymous uses to throw anyone whose principles he didn't like into. It lumps a bunch of very different people together to create one convenient but totally misleading villain.
And when you actually break it down, you see Anonymous is blaming three totally separate groups. You've got the actual human rights movement, right? But then you've also got these unnamed journalists and columnists. And then, get this, he even throws in officials from the Clinton administration. Gaer's point is, you can't just lump them all together. It's completely unfair to blame an activist for something a politician decided to do.
All right, Section 4, peace versus justice officials. Now, this is where Gaer really goes in and exposes what she sees as a huge, glaring contradiction right at the heart of the whole Anonymous argument. It's all about the contradictory standards he applies.
See, what Anonymous does is apply two totally different and frankly contradictory sets of rules for the officials who are involved in the conflict. It's pretty wild when you see it laid out.
Check out this double standard. On one hand, Anonymous says the human rights fact-finders, yeah, they have to be independent. They should report the facts, but, not be too disruptive. But then you look at the war crimes prosecutors. For them, he says they should not be independent. They should basically just stay quiet if calling for justice might mess up the delicate peace talks. So, which one is it? Independent or not?
And this is exactly Gantier's point, put perfectly. You just can't have it both ways. It makes no sense to demand total independence for one official, but then tell another, a prosecutor, that they need to bend to the will of politicians. You can't just pick and choose based on what's convenient for the peace talks.
So, that brings us to the final verdict. If all that isn't the role of human rights workers, then what is? Well, Gaer wraps up her argument by laying out what she sees as the uncompromising, absolutely essential role of the human rights community.
For Gaer, it's a clear three-step mission, and there's just no room for compromise. Step 1, you spotlight the abuses. You find the facts and you report them, no matter how ugly or inconvenient they are. Step 2, you demand action. You call on the world powers to actually do something to stop the horror. And Step 3, you call for punishment. You insist that the people who did these things are held accountable, period.
And this really gets to the core of her whole argument. The second the human rights community starts watering down its message to make politicians happy, it loses everything. It's no longer an impartial force for human rights. It just becomes another political player, another voice in the noise. And that's a line you just can't cross.
And so, at the end of all this, we're left with a really profound and, honestly, a pretty uncomfortable question. When you're facing down true atrocity, where do you draw the line between seeking peace and demanding justice? Is a flawed peace today better than a just peace, maybe, someday? And who on earth gets to make that devastating choice?